ability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello and good evening. This is Don Swans. And for the next hour, I'll be reading from the April 5th issue of the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Front page. A woman lifting barbells. It's entitled The Women Who Love the Manosphere. It's by Will Groff. Sometimes, when Allie DeSanto listens to her favorite podcast this past weekend with Theo Vaughn, she laughs so hard she gets tears in her eyes. But its freewheeling host can get serious too. He's not afraid to get vulnerable. He speaks very honestly about his life and struggles and issues with addiction. The 34-year-old Central Floridian said, "He's just so relatable." Vaughn, a mulleted dude, comedian in Nashville, has become the Barbara Walters of the manosphere, conducting laid-back interviews that sometimes turn into therapy sessions. He's talked about drug addiction with Donald Trump. Cocaine will turn you into a damn owl, homie, he memorably told the president. Childhood trauma with mixed martial arts fighter Sean Strickland, and mental health with singer Post Malone. His mix of crass humor and heartfelt empathy has shot him to the top of the male cultural zeitgeist and earned him a growing audience of women, too. In the manosphere, a new media universe where bro-friendly hosts like Vaughn and Joe Rogan reign supreme, women fans represent an under-tapped market. Podcasts increasingly run on advertising revenue, and women are the ultimate audience to reach, as they influence the bulk of household spending. Many of them are looking for exactly what these shows deliver: a politically adaptable, occasionally vulgar lens on the complicated times we're living through. Women make up 28% of Vaughn's audience and 22% of Rogan's, according to data from Edison Research. Those hosts and their peers touch on a range of topics: politics, foreign policy, health, philosophy, music, religion, comedy. The tone is guyish, but the content is general interest. All of the podcasters mentioned declined to comment or did not respond to requests for comment. The manosphere has faced pushback in some circles for promoting a model of masculinity that trades in misogyny. Misogyny. Sheryl Sandberg, the former Meta executive, recently announced that her feminist nonprofit, Lean In, would shift its focus to fighting the manosphere's growing influence, particularly the promotion of traditional gender roles by some of its stars. We will continue to push back on old bad ideas dressed up to seem new so that women can lead full, rich lives no matter which path they choose, a spokesman for Lean In said in a statement. Of course, there are extreme personalities in the manosphere whose programs focus obsessively on gender dynamics and dating. The host of the Fresh and Fit podcast regularly employ a female delusion calculator to deride what they say are women's unrealistic dating standards. But even those shows, labeled sexist by critics, draw a modest share of female listeners who are looking for contrarian tales or simply find them fascinating. Katie Popplewell, a 36-year-old electronic music producer in Cincinnati, said she identifies as left of center on most issues. She's an avid viewer of NBC's Today program and ABC World News Tonight, and broadly trusts traditional news outlets. She's also a huge fan of Jordan B. Peterson, a clinical psychologist and former University of Toronto professor whose views of traditional gender roles have drawn criticism from progressives. I have a background in psychology, so I appreciate how he discusses complex ideas and how they're connected to clinical and behavioral frameworks. Popplewell said, a lot of his audience might be male-dominated, but psychological principles like responsibility and meaning are not gender-specific. She said his politics are not a deterrent, despite them being different from her own. I will listen to anything someone puts in front of me. I don't want to be told how to feel about someone, said Elizabeth Craig, 30-year-old marketing professional and content creator in Nashville, Tennessee. She spends up to 24 hours a week listening to the Joe Rogan Experience, Kill Tony, or This Past Weekend, and the Tim Dillon Show, as well as more conventionally female-oriented podcasts like The Toast and It's Me, Tinks. Then there are others she loves that are better described as manosphere adjacent. Andrew Huberman, the brawny neuroscientist and podcaster with a cult following, is a source Craig turns to for wellness advice. Following Huberman's self-described protocols, Craig adheres to a rigid sleep schedule and workout routine, and never skips her morning dose of cryotherapy, collagen supplementation, and sunlight exposure. She cites his guidance on her TikTok page, where she promotes a disciplinarian approach to physical fitness. Craig, who has over 2,200 TikTok followers, commands an audience that is 97% female, according to influencer marketing platform Creator IQ. She said she regularly receives messages from women of all ages who are looking to take agency over their lives and bodies. Craig sees much of the women's wellness content as downstream of the manosphere. She points to the pink washing of creatine, a workout supplement that was a staple of male-dominant bodybuilding communities long before it became popular with women. I kick myself every day for not thinking of making that thing into a gummy and selling it to women, because the girl that did that is making a gajillion dollars, Craig said. Huberman's audience is 62% men and 38% women. according to data from Medicine Research. He frequently invites women's health experts onto his podcast to discuss issues such as fertility and menstruation. Ashanti Febbles, a 36-year-old human resources professional in New Jersey, said that when she attended Vaughn's live shows, she found herself surrounded by other women. I don't think he realizes how many women watch him. You can just tell that by some of his ads, such as those for chewable tablets that contain the same active ingredient as Viagra. These shows have gained outsized influence in recent years, earning credit for winning Trump young men's votes in the 2024 election. By and large, their appeal lies in their comedy, which can take aim at progressive ideas, but more often takes the shape of absurdist personal anecdotes, plus the occasional fart joke. I had 3 brothers growing up, so just being around that bro humor is a little nostalgic, said Sarah Lott, a 40-year-old fan of Vaughn based in Brooklyn, New York. If you go on Hinge, being funny is always one of the most important things, she said, referring to the dating app. Vaughn was among the media personalities who attended President Trump's inauguration last year. When Trump won the 2024 election, his close ally, Dana White, the Ultimate Fighting Championship president, thanks several prominent manosphere voices, Rogan, the Nelk Boys, and Aiden Ross for having the president on their shows. These appearances provided Trump with a friendly forum to riff on policy issues, and in the case of Impulsive with Logan Paul, impress young male voters with his knowledge about the worlds of boxing and UFC. But for Lott, who works in the costume department on film and television sets, there's nothing inherently political about listening to This Past Weekend. She pointed out that Vaughn has interviewed guests from across the political spectrum, including Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Ro Khanna, a progressive from California. When Vaughn does address politics, let me start over on that one. When Vaughn does address politics and global affairs, his convictions are clear, Lott said. He has openly opposed American diplomatic and financial support of Israel, for instance, and expressed concerns for civilians in Gaza. If we don't speak up now, our children won't have the chance to speak up, by law or worse. It made me more of a fan, Lott said. Tim Dillon, a sardonic comic and commentator who interviewed Vice President J.D. Vance in the lead-up to the 2024 election, has taken it a step further. He has excoriated the current administration on issues including immigrant arrests by federal agents and the war in Iran, speaking about Trump's second term in often apocalyptic terms. A recent emergency episode was subtitled Iran, Israel, and Imminent Destruction. For Lorena Reyna, a 37-year-old who describes her politics as those of a disaffected millennial, Dillon's show provides a home base for her and others who lean left but no longer have faith in the Democratic establishment. Women make up a little under 15% of his audience, according to Edison Research. Obviously, he's edgy and always has been. But it's really to show the absurdity and the cynicism on both sides, said Reyna, who works at a comedy club in Austin, Texas. We're living through these absurd times, and the podcast reflects that absurdity. Ahead of the midterm elections later this year, the manosphere could offer politicians from across the aisle a chance to reach both men and women in its audience. Texas State Representative and rising progressive star James Tallarico's appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience last July was so successful that Rogan offered an informal endorsement, telling the U.S. Senate hopeful he should run for president. I do think it's going to take the left going where they don't feel comfortable going, said Reyna, who voted for write-in candidates during the past 3 presidential elections, but plans to cast a ballot for Tallarico in November. But just going on isn't enough. They have to go on and be real, she said. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Well, certainly changing the subject is this next short article written by Tara Weiss, and it's entitled, "This Musical's Secret Weapon is a Math Major." Applied mathematics are used to move around 6 different audiences in a new version of The Phantom of the Opera. Simon Broche didn't expect to use his mathematics degree for his music assistant job at Masquerade, the new interactive revival of The Phantom of the Opera in New York. But when Masquerade producers were struggling to figure out how to make it so that actors and the audience moved through the show on schedule, Broke, 26, volunteered his background. He has dual degrees from Columbia University in music and mathematics, which uses spreadsheets and modeling to solve real-world problems. Masquerade follows the point of view of the Phantom, a disfigured musical genius who now lives in the Paris Opera House and is obsessed with singer Christine Daae. Producer Randy Weiner and his wife, the director Diane Paulus, needed to get the audience in lockstep from the start to the finish of the show in just under 2 hours. They also needed to get all 42 actors to their spots to perform at the right time throughout the space. This would be simple if there was only one audience. Instead, there are 6. We were building the plane while we were flying it, Weiner said. Simon is a collaborator in a process that's entirely fluid. In their previous interactive show, Sleep No More, a reimagining of Shakespeare's Macbeth, audiences could move freely as they chose characters to follow. But in Masquerade, 6 cohorts of 60 audience members need to be spaced out evenly as they take in the show in a 30,000 square foot, 5-floor warehouse once occupied by an art supply company. When the weather is warmer, some of the show takes place on the roof. They can't bump into each other or any of the actors also rushing around getting in and out of costume. We don't want to ever break the sense of immersion within the story. But it's cool to highlight just how much of a Herculean effort the cast puts in to make the whole machine run every night, said Brooke, who's now a full-time creative assistant and scripted supervisor. The result is an intimate reimagining of the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical with showgoers so close they can see sweat dripping from actors' faces. The first 6 weeks sold out in less than 3 hours, and the show has been extended until September 6th. Throughout the performance, white mask-clad butlers guide audiences to their destination. But Brooke originally mapped out the show, including sending each group past the two-way mirror the Phantom uses to spy on the Opera House, and down an escalator to the Phantom's lair as he paddles a boat with Christine while singing The Phantom of the Opera. To make the journey work without the audiences seeing each other, Brooke uses a mathematical application called a Caesar cipher, created by the Roman general to send encrypted messages. Each letter in a standard Caesar cipher is replaced by the 1-3 spots down the alphabet. To an A becomes a D. When the end of the alphabet is reached, it loops back to an A. The circular concept also works with numbers that loop like time on a clock, said Dorian Goldfield, the Columbia University mathematics professor. Goldfield gave this simplified example of a Caesar cipher. If it's 2 p.m. and you want to know what time it will be 27 hours from now, that's a 24-hour loop around the clock plus 3 hours, or 5 p.m. Brooke broke Masquerade into 15-minute 15-minute cyclical story blocks that are repeated 6 times. Each one moves around the performers. So if an audience stays in the same spot for the entire night, they'll see the same scene occur 6 times every 15 minutes. It took trial and error to arrive at the Brooke tried versions with an 18 and 13-minute stagger, but the creative team found that the scenes didn't flow as naturally. Moving the cast around was trickier. Brooke created an elaborate color and number-coded spreadsheet tracking each cast member's location, scene, and song in those 15-minute increments to ensure the staging appears effortless. We never want the audience to feel like this is a puzzle where you have to make sure you're in the right spot, Brooke said, because that takes you out of the impression of the show and the emotion of the story. Audiences usually have no idea they are one of 6. Carolyn Martin, 25, has seen Masquerade 3 times and only discovered that there are overlapping performances because her flight from Raleigh, North Carolina was delayed. When she was moved to a later audience, She discovered there were multiple performances happening simultaneously because her new entrance time was later than her original. It's quite remarkable, she said. Somehow, they get everyone where they need to be. You're listening to Reading of Articles and Features on the Wall Street Journal's review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As a parent, I was freaking out about AI. I got help. That's the title of an article by Emma Rosenblum, regular contributor and the author of the novels Bad Summer People and Mean Moms. Let's take a look-see. Artificial intelligence has come for parenting. No, I don't mean that your children will soon be disciplined by chatbots or diaper changed by sentient robots. I mean that AI now sits squarely atop the pile of modern parents' anxieties, having, rapidly eclipsed boogeymen like screen time and social media. Your kid is begging for a phone. That seems quaint in comparison to the full-blown panic that he or she will graduate into a dystopian future in which there are no jobs. Autonomous systems have assumed control of the military, and the economy divided. The economy is divided into a billionaire class and their legions of serfs. If that seems extreme, welcome to my mom brain at 4 a.m. I've been sleeping less lately because of AI anxiety, thinking there is no turning back, and this could quickly turn out of control. A dad friend of mine echoed after I'd solicited thoughts on the matter of Instagram. The response came in hot. It scared the S out of me, one mom wrote. Our schools are grossly unprepared for this, said another. I've been thinking a lot about how the careers that my kids would excel at probably won't exist, and questioning what they will do instead, said another. My husband, who works in tech, thinks our kids won't go to college because in-person learning will change. Also that we have to save all our money because they won't have jobs. He's freaking out, wrote a friend. The topic now comes up at every dinner party and parent gathering where conversations circle various catastrophic outcomes. In 10 years, everyone will be on universal basic income until someone mercifully offers to open another bottle of wine. Yes, please. I was sent a flyer for a panel at a New York City private school called Parenting in the Age of AI, featuring speakers who promise tips on how to prepare your children and yourselves in the evolving world of artificial intelligence. But how can you protect them from something that's changing so rapidly? The uncertainty and fear surrounding AI is better grappled with society-wide, but it hits parents particularly hard. A recent Brookings report issued a dire warning about the effects of AI on learning, saying it would lead to the great unwiring of students' cognitive capacities. The American Psychological Association has released research on adolescence indicating that strong attachments to AI-generated characters may contribute to struggles with learning social skills and developing emotional connections. My older son, who's 10, knows that ChatGPT isn't really a person, but it sure as heck sounds like one, even to me. We were told that if we put our children in the right schools, if we allow them to feel their feelings, if we make sure they get enough sleep, stay off Snapchat, never touch a Dorito, they will attend a good college and have a respectable career. The looming threat of AI has upended that formula, and it doesn't feel fair. Will our kids learn how to think for themselves? Will they be able to relate to other humans? Or will I end up being the mother-in-law to a chatbot? It makes sense that parents are stressed about AI, especially if they're seeing it everywhere, on every podcast, and in every headline. Says Meredith Elkins, a clinical psychologist and the author of Parenting Anxiety, Breaking the Cycle of Worry and Raising Resilient Kids. We've been so outcomes focused, so focused on the college and the job and the economics of security, says Elkins, who has a PhD, because so much of that is out of our control right now. That gives us the chance to focus more on the process. I ask if she has any actionable tips, and she suggests a helpful reframe, one that doesn't include deep research into AI-proof careers. I've heard of parents doing this. Or pricing out upstate farmland in case we have to live off the grid. I've done this myself at 4 a.m. Ultimately, the task of parenting has not changed, despite the demoralization of AI. It's still about how can we raise adaptable, grounded humans who can respond to disruption, and even more important, who believe they can respond to disruption, says Elkins. In other words, the only way to AI-proof your kid is to teach them, in the wise words of Chumbawamba, that they'll get knocked down, but they'll get up again. Resiliency is the key to functioning in a world moving so quickly under their feet. Elkins assures me this will be easier than I think. If you see your kid is doing a great job tolerating frustration, say the video game console breaks, instead of throwing it against the wall, they fix it. That's an opportunity to be like, hey, you dealt with that really well, she says. Or, when you notice flexibility, they were supposed to go to a friend's house and someone got sick, but they pivoted nicely. You can say, I saw you rebounded really well. She suggests encouraging your kids to take initiative, rather than waiting for instructions, to take healthy risks and to do things more independently. These are core skills that research tells us over and over are related to long-term adaptability, Elkins says. And finally, Elkins gently reminds me this also applies to grown-ups. If we're modeling our anxiety about this, we're radiating urgency, alarm, and pressure. Our kids learn to feel that way too. In other words, try as best you can to stop the AI panic swirl. It's not helpful, and your children will absorb your hysteria. After my conversation with Elkins, I approached one of my sons. He'd recently been nervous about starting a new activity, but he'd persevered, and so I said to him, "I'm proud of how well you dealt with that challenge." He looked at me like I was a lunatic, but he heard me. So perhaps I planted a seed. That night, I went to bed without Googling, quote, AI tsunami, unquote, or how to get a plumber's license. And for the first time in a while, I slept till morning. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The title is "A Scary Diagnosis Taught Me How to Cope with Stress." It's written by Jonathan Gluck, who's the author of an exercise in uncertainty, from which this essay is adapted. Subtitle: For anyone facing nerve-wracking uncertainty, the waiting is the hardest part. Here are a few strategies for managing the anxiety of anticipation. In 2003, as a 38-year-old with no history of serious illness and the first-time father of a 7-month-old girl, I was diagnosed with a rare form of bone marrow cancer called multiple myeloma. At the time, I was told I might have as little as 18 months to live. Well, that was 22 years ago. It's not a stretch to say I'm something of a medical miracle. That's the good news. The bad news is that multiple myeloma, while treatable, is not curable. Since my diagnosis, I've undergone multiple rounds of radiation therapy, chemotherapy, and various forms of immunotherapy. I've been in and out of remission many times and hospitalized for weeks. Every 3 to 6 months, I undergo scans and other tests, then wait anxiously for the results. You could say I've become something of an expert in dealing with high-stress ambiguity, a situation most of us face at some time in our lives. Whether you're waiting to hear back about a medical test, bar exam results, a job interview, or anything else anxiety-inducing. Here's my advice for how to cope. Research shows one of the best ways to block anxious thoughts is to engage in activities that induce a flow state, a frame of mind in which you're thinking strictly of what you're doing in that moment and nothing else. For some people, that's baking or yoga, piano playing or knitting. For me, it's fly fishing. I was an avid fisherman before I got sick, but after my diagnosis, the sport became much more meaningful to me as a form of psychotherapy. Studies have shown exerting control over your situation proactively can help relieve the stress associated with waiting. As helpful methods for quelling anxiety, research participants waiting for medical test results have cited familiarizing themselves with their insurance policies, researching the best doctor to see, and investigating what clinical trials are available, even before they received a diagnosis. It can also be useful to look for silver linings in bad news before it arrives. Kate Sweeney, a psychology professor at the University of California, Riverside, who studies so-called high-stakes waiting periods, calls that preemptive benefit finding, or predemption. In one study, Sweeney asked people undergoing a breast biopsy, "Is there any good you can imagine that might come out of it if you find out you have breast cancer?" Although Sweeney worried that the question might be insulting to even ask, roughly 3/4 of the participants said yes. They could envision such a thing, appreciating their family more, being a role model for their children, and getting healthier were among the positive outcomes. Articulating these possibilities helped them cope while waiting for their results. In one notable study of high-stakes anticipation, researchers found that people who had a 50% chance of receiving an electric shock felt more stressed than people who had a 100% chance of receiving a shock. In other words, the waiting is so uncomfortable, people would rather experience the bad outcome than continue not knowing. That's how bad we are as humans at tolerating uncertainty, Sweeney says. When waiting situations generate anxiety, it can be useful to realize you're not alone. If coping with uncertainty seems hard, it helps to know that's normal. Catherine Anderson is a psychology professor at Amherst College who has written about uncertainty. Several years ago, Sanderson's husband lost his job. It was a position he had held for 20 years, and he was let go suddenly and unfairly. We were definitely facing uncertainty. At first, Sanderson says she and her husband were reluctant to share what had happened with anyone except a few family members and close friends. They felt isolated and alone. But when they eventually started telling more people what happened, they felt flooded with love and support, Sanderson says. In some ways, they never felt more loved. What we know about stress in general is it's made better by feeling like you're not alone. When people are experiencing uncertainty and they feel they have to cope with it on their own, that itself can make it worse. A few weeks ago, I underwent my most recent scans. It wasn't fishing weather, so that distraction was off the table. For the 4 days of waiting, I occupied my free time by having lunch with a friend, reading a book, watching movies and TV shows with my kids, and playing in my regular poker game. When I felt especially anxious, I bent my wife's ear nearly to the breaking point. None of that eliminated my anxiety, but all of it helped, particularly my wife's support. My scans, thankfully, came up clean, and I won $32 in my poker game. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. Now here's an interesting one. It's entitled The New Museum Heist Tactic. In and out in 3 minutes. It's by Julie Brenner Debich. Just months after 4 thieves carried out a brazen 8 minutes smash and grab at the Louvre in Paris, making off with $102 million worth of French crown jewels, another brazen museum heist happened in even less time. A group of thieves stole 3 artworks by Renoir, Matisse, and Cézanne, reportedly worth a combined $11.5 million. And in this case, the crime took 3 minutes. The robbery happened at the Magnani Rocca Foundation, housed in a neoclassical villa just outside Parma in northern Italy's countryside. The artworks were displayed in the French room on the upper floor. It's a wake-up call to the art world that the Louvre incident might have spawned a wave of copycat thefts. The fact that thieves were able to infiltrate the Louvre in the city center in just 8 minutes was a sign to criminals that they can get in anywhere, said attorney Christopher Marinello of the London and Venice-based group Art Recovery International, who's not working on the specific case. The firm represents victims and insurance companies in recovering stolen artworks, often serving as the intermediary between perpetrators and law enforcement. The Louvre theft taught thieves that speed and force are the way to go, said more theatrical because the crew dressed as construction workers to enter in broad daylight while the building was filled with visitors. This museum and other museums have not learned enough from the Louvre theft, he said. In Parma, the thieves entered the front door late Sunday night, March 22nd, just 1 week after the Magnani Rocca Foundation reopened for the summer season. The museum is closed on Mondays. Speaking from experience, Marinello said museums like this are often not allowed to put in an armed or metal door because it's not in keeping with original architecture. The foundation responded to a request for comment with a statement translated from the Italian that read in part, "The foundation immediately activated all required procedures and is collaborating with the Carabinieri Unit for the Protection of Cultural Heritage and competent authorities who are conducting the investigation." Italy is full of small cultural institutions that are loaded with beautiful art. All you need is a crowbar and 3 minutes to walk away with something, Marianello said. According to the Italian news outlet La Repubblica, the thieves were interrupted by the museum's security system and abandoned an attempt to grab a fourth artwork. One of the challenges facing museums is the significant increase in the value of art that is in their collections, not only adding to the cost of their insurance premiums, but also making the work far more enticing to thieves. According to Lindsay Dewar, head of analytics at art market research firm Art Tactic, the value of impressionist and modern art, like those stolen from the Magnani Rocca, sold at major auction houses since 2000, has risen by more than 400%. A long history of art robbery shows that museums may never quite be able to shut out thieves. Da Vinci's Mona Lisa was stolen in 1911 by an Italian employee of the Louvre who wanted to repatriate the masterpiece. He hid in a broom closet until after the museum had closed, then walked out with the painting under his coat. It was recovered 2 years later in Florence when the perpetrator tried to sell it. In 1994, 2 thieves broke a window at the National Gallery in Oslo and absconded with Munch's The Scream, leaving behind a note that read, "Thanks for the poor security." 10 years later, a different version of the painting was stolen in an armed robbery along with the artist's Madonna from the Munch Museum across town. All 3 paintings were recovered, though, says Marianello, 95% of the billions of dollars worth of art stolen every year is never found. The investigation into the Louvre jewel hoist is ongoing. 4 suspects are in French custody, but the stolen jewels remain missing. The Magnani Rocca Foundation contains the art collection of musicologist and art critic Luigi Magnani, the heir to a dairy fortune. Established in 1977, the villa became a public museum in 1990, 6 years after his death. The collection spans old masters like Titian, Daer, and Goya, 2 modern masterpieces including Monet and De Chirico, as well as the works that were taken. The centerpiece of the collection is an ensemble of 50 paintings by Giorgio Morandi, whose studio was in nearby Bologna. Magnani was a benefactor and close friend of the reclusive artist, known for his muted still lives of different ceramic vessels in various configurations. Last year, the David Zwirner Gallery brought the foundation's Morandi paintings to New York for several weeks while the villa was closed for the winter. Magnani was a visionary collector, said gallery partner David Lieber, who oversaw the Morandi exhibition and the extensive export licenses that were required to get the works out of Italy. To have this intensely coherent collection disturbed by this brazen theft is a tragedy. Here's a short note by Emily Sneff. It's entitled, "It Was a Breaking Story," and it's about the Declaration of Independence. One of the greatest scoops in the course of human events appeared in a German-language newspaper in Philadelphia. On July 5, 1776, the Pennsylvanische Staatsbote reported that the Declaration of Independence is just in the press. Translation is now in the press. The paper beat its English language competitors in breaking the news. Americans often treat their nation's founding text as a relic, best observed through thick glass at the National Archives. It's easy to forget that the old document was once a top story. Emily Sneff, a historian, seeks to recover this moment in when the Declaration of Independence was news. 272 pages published by Oxford Press. The Pennsylvania Staatsbote probably learned that the Continental Congress had several ties with Great Britain from a source in the shop of John Dunlap, who had a contract to print the body's resolutions. On the evening of July 4th, Dunlap got to work printing broadsides, single sheets of paper printed on one side and ready for rapid reproduction, to fulfill the Declaration's command to publish and declare the news of independence. Miss Sneff imagines the work of Dunlap and his staff. They would have lightly inked the surface of the type, set a sheet of slightly damp Dutch-made paper in the frame, laid the paper against the type form, added pressure to transfer the ink to the page, and hung the freshly printed sheet to dry. Minor mysteries surround the production of what are now called the Dunlap broadsides, the first published copies of the Declaration. At least one copy included a peculiar quotation marks in the opening paragraphs. There may have been a typographical error. More likely, there were mistakes from the manuscript Dunlap was working from that this printer later corrected. Some historians have speculated that Thomas Jefferson showed up to supervise publications. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 5th issue of the Wall Street Journal Review. We read from the Wall Street Journal Review every Thursday at 7 p.m. Your reader this evening has been Don Swans. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be here next week. Same time, same place. On the dial of the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service.
Coming up next on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the New York Times. Following at 9 o'clock is Money Magazine, and at 10 o'clock we have episode number 24 of The Secret of Secrets by Dan Brown. Stay with us for these readings and more. If you or people you know shop at any of the Dash's supermarkets, please save Dash's register tapes for radio reading. Our agency receives $2 for every $100 in Dash's register tapes. Radio reading has raised thousands of dollars so far. Anyone can drop off their Dashes tapes to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability,